Bob Emiliani is a recognized global expert on the theory and practice of lean management and its origins. He's a prolific writer, having published 27 books and either authored or co-authored over 40 peer-reviewed papers on a range of management topics, including management history, supply chain management, and materials engineering. More recently, he was professor of the School of Engineering, Science and Technology at Connecticut State University, where he taught for over 23 years. He holds an MS degree in chemical engineering and a BS degree in mechanical engineering. Today, in addition to his continued writing, Bob works as a consultant, executive coach, and a provider of online training.
So first, on what is, do you want to start with what is lean for the newcomer?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
a tiny introduction of what the roots are of it, perhaps, and then just what are the key concepts, that really sum up lean as a management philosophy.
Okay. So the modern origin of progressive management, which is what I term to be management that it differs from what is normally done in organizations. So what is, the typical way organizations are led, I refer to that as classical management or conventional management. Progressive management is the desire and the methodologies and so forth to lead and manage an organization in a different way, and substantially different way compared to classical management. And so the modern origin of progressive management begins with scientific management in the late 1800s. And that is developed through the 1930s. And a key development in the evolution of scientific management was the creation of industrial engineering. And so if we go back to the late 1800s, it was referred to as industrial administration, then industrial management. And then as these methods and ideas became more fully developed, it created the field of industrial engineering. And that proves pivotal in the development of Toyota's production system, because without industrial engineering, TPS would not exist. However, Toyota took the IE thinking and the IE methods and did a lot of great things to those methods and made them much more useful, and applied it to ways of improving the work. So the focus was, how do we improve the work? And ultimately, how do we improve productivity? Because when Toyota got started, yes, sir.
Save over talking. Could you just give us an example about, what sort of things we're talking about with industrial engineering as you've framed it, and how does it compare with mass production? Because I think that was kind of the problem situation that TPS was in some senses trying to address, was it not?
Well, it was. The development of industrial engineering, though, was in a mass production environment, but for a seller's market, meaning everything that a producer could make got sold. So scientific management was a management system developed to be able to satisfy customer demand in a seller's market. But Toyota faced a different market, which was a buyer's market for automobiles, and there was lots of competition. And so they had to come up with a different way of facing that competition, and they couldn't just do what everybody else did because they didn't have the money or the scale.
Oh, this is a really interesting insight. So are you saying that the mass production or the industrial engineering, the scientific management part of it, that was actually working quite well if you've got vastly more demand than you can cope with? But
Yes.
when the pendulum swings to you don't have the demand, or at least the demand is there, but it's not for your product, you can't use that system.
Well, you can use that system, but you end up building a lot of inventory and having to bear that expense.
Okay.
Or finding people who will take that inventory off your hands, such as an automobile dealer network. To basically, as the automaker, forcing your dealer network to purchase certain volume of vehicles, and for them to figure out a way to sell it. That's their problem, the dealer's problem. But what Toyota came up with was, concepts that had been around a while, but they certainly improved and refined them. And being in the loom business, which is a machine with a whole lot of parts, and you need a lot of inventory of those parts, and they understood the expenses associated with that. What they wanted to do instead was to build automobiles just in time. So basically you get an order and then you make a vehicle. If you have no order, you don't make a vehicle. As opposed to in mass production, you don't have orders, but you make things anyway and hope it sells. So it's a very different framing and orientation, this switch from a seller's market to a buyer's market. And I've long said, and few have listened, that you should manage to the market. And if you're a company today in a buyer's market, you should be certainly doing something like Toyota Production System and its derivative interpretation, Lean, which we can talk more about that later. But what you find is a lot of companies today continue to manage in a seller's market way because the systems and the metrics and so forth that were developed in the late 1800s, 1910s, 20s, and 30s are still in use today. And these were standard cost accounting was a seller's market way of dealing with costs. It's not a buyer's market way of dealing with costs and so forth.
You mean cost plus? You just mark up the costs.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So Toyota folks took the IE and turned it into something much more practical, useful, something that anybody could use. You didn't have to be an industrial engineer. The methods, the concepts, tools, and so forth, anybody could learn them, whether they were high school educated or less, or university educated or more, no matter what their discipline was. Fujio Cho, the former president of Toyota, was a law school graduate, and he became one of Taiichi Ohno's famous people within Taiichi Ohno's group, him and Kikuo Suzumura and so forth.
Right.
So this was a very different approach to dealing with the marketplace than what had previously been the case.
And they were forced into that because they were faced with having to rebuild or breathe new life back into the Toyota Motor Company, which was facing bankruptcy after the war. Was that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's that, and then there was some changes in labor laws post World War II, and so forth, and a confluence of a bunch of things come together. But fundamentally, the marketplace is different, and they, it doesn't take a business genius to figure out that, if your baseline of experience is making a product that contains a lot of parts, that a lot of money's tied up in inventory, and dreaming, what if we go into a new line of work, automobiles, but we can find a way to do it without having all that inventory. And they didn't have the capital to fund the inventory associated with mass producing automobiles.
So what would be a couple of examples of, I mean, I don't know whether we're sort of moving into Lean now or not, but to bring this to life, to make it a bit more tangible, what would be a couple of examples of insights that Toyota brought to this? Bob,
well, I think two of the most amazing things is they took a lot of ideas that were already out there, but they brought them together into a coherent system of management and associated leadership practices. So just in time existed in old Detroit, in the Detroit automaking world in the early 1900s. And there was stuff written about that, and it was called hand-to-mouth buying was the phrase that was used back then. It was the same thing as just in time. And automation, Jidoka automation with a human touch seems to be Sakichi Toyota's invention that ended up being important in the development of Toyota's production system. But they took these IE methods, industrial engineering methods, and figured out how to improve upon them and so forth. And they brought together all these ideas, and it evolved over time a very different and much more progressive way of leading and managing an organization. And this became something that most people just were not aware of until the oil crisis hit. And as the story goes, Toyota suffered much less than other companies when the oil crisis hit. They were still profitable while others were in losses and so forth because of the cost of operations as a result of higher oil prices. And so people started to study Toyota. And the early study of Toyota was study of Toyota production system. But then in the middle to late 1980s, a US government funded a study at Massachusetts Institute of Technology to figure out why Japanese automakers generally, not just Toyota, but Nissan and the others, were more, efficient in automobile production. Fewer labor hours, higher quality, shorter lead time, shorter time to change over from one model to another, and so forth. And why were they so much more efficient and productive? And through the course of the
and this study, if I may interject briefly,
Sure.
was led by James Womack, is that right?
Yeah, he was one of the lead researchers on that. There was Dan Jones, and there was a few others.
But it was pretty comprehensive. I mean, I read that it was sort of 17 countries, and around about half of the global production volume of automotive.
It was a huge study. I mean, back in the 1980s, mid to late 1980s, it was like a $5 million study. It was big money.
Yeah.
And the automaking in the U.S. is, of course, a big business, and the U.S. government has an interest in that. A lot of jobs, and of course, obviously mobility in a expanding suburban environment, and so on.
And what were the key findings from that study? What would you?
They did a whole lot of writing and reports, of course, but I mean, of course, some of the key findings was essentially bringing this idea of Toyota production system to the masses, which they gave what they thought then to be the generic name for Toyota production system, called Lean, and they called it Lean production, and it was named Lean just because it required fewer resources to produce whatever the output was. And they in seeking to give it this generic name, because they reasoned that if you called it Toyota production system, other companies wouldn't adopt it because it said Toyota in the word.
Right.
General Motors is not Toyota, so why would GM adopt a Toyota production system?
That's right.
But it turns out that other organizations don't adopt either TPS or Lean for different reasons than the name Toyota. So anyway, they gave it the generic name, hoping that large companies would adopt this. And so the focus initially was, Toyota is a big company, so other big companies will adopt it. But Toyota actually started on this path as a very small company, as a startup. And the positioning of Lean way back when, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, should have been for startup businesses, but it wasn't. It was for, the primary focus was, let's, work with the very large companies in the world and try to get them to do this. And of course, they don't want to do that for reasons that I've elucidated in my various books. So it was sort of a fundamental boo-boo from the beginning to start out with, present this to large businesses. It should have been startups, small and mid-sized businesses would have been the right targeting for it. Nowadays, of course, Lean, which fundamentally, by the way, is very important to understand, it is a derivative interpretation of Toyota's production system, and then more broadly Toyota's management system. So and because we're going from Japanese to English, and it's being interpreted by Westerners who don't understand Japanese history or culture or language, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly we're not in the shoes of those people in the post-World War II Toyota environment to understand, the crisis on their hands and the urgent need to re-engage manufacturing in the country, to elevate the economic situation for the population, et cetera. So, a lot gets lost in translation. And the initial look at this sort of stuff was, really focused on technical aspects, quality and productivity and so forth, and not the human aspects. And so later, as the Lean folks kept studying this and so on, and the book Machine That Changed the World comes out, and Lean thinking and so forth, it illuminates a little bit more of the human aspect, but not enough. And so
you said that, interestingly, you said that you felt this system, Lean management system, would have been more successful had it have been aimed at smaller companies, more nimble companies that were able, because of their smaller size, just to change direction and adopt something new. But that wasn't.
Well, I don't know if it would have been more successful. well, my thought was that it should have been targeted towards those businesses.
Right.
Because a funny thing happens when a business grows, and oftentimes it ends up reverting back to classical management and the old way of doing business, especially when there's a change in ownership or a change in leadership. And if you're a small startup, if you're a startup business or a small business or a mid-sized business, you can go in a couple of directions. One is we are the size we are and we want to stay that way, or we want to grow. And if we want to grow, that might mean we want to sell the business. And of course, in the recent years, a lot of startups are started for the purpose of flipping the business, get it going, and then sell it to invest, sell out to some investors, and then they'll come in and change the management and so forth. So even if you were successful with Lean as a startup or small or mid-sized business, there's no guarantee that that would survive once there's a change in ownership or change in leadership. In fact, that's usually the highest, mortality of Lean in an organization is due to changes in leadership and ownership.
Do you think the Lean startup people, the Eric Ries and all of those, have tried to do that, or do you think that their kind of interpretation of Lean is fundamentally, misconstrued? How do you?
Yeah, both.
Right.
Yeah, yes, and yes to your two observations. But this is sort of typical. It's not such an easy thing to understand. And there's a quote from a former president of Toyota that said, "I worked for the company for 43 years and I don't understand it still." So it's really presumptuous of people to say, I'm a TP. You might be a Lean expert, which again, Lean is not the same thing as Toyota's management. Lean the terminology we use, we got to be careful. So whether you call it Lean production, it's not the same thing as Toyota production system. If you call it Lean management, it's not the same thing as Toyota management system. It's two different things. They're similar, and you can do a lot of good in your business by adopting Lean, but it's not the same. But people use these terms interchangeably, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's what happened.
I had a conversation with Nigel Thurlow last week about this, and we were trying to sort of, I guess, crystallize in a sentence the essence of Lean. I'm not sure it's possible based on what you've just said, but we were sort of ending up at the point where we said, well, the essence of it is continually seeking at the operational level, at the detailed level, of trying to maximize the amount of time that you're spending delivering value to customers. That's because the more there's a higher percentage of the time is spent producing value-added things rather than tending a machine with an oil can, or having people come in to replace an arm on a robotic machine because it's actually worn out, or having to continually reorganize the shop floor because you're using the same real estate to do painting. And the more that you can actually sort of stop doing all of that and focus on the actual delivery of value, the better. Is that kind of really roughly what it's about?
Well, I wouldn't call it maximizing, because that and because humans are involved in this activity, and so when we think of maximizing an output, we think of minimizing. There's this sort of dichotomy that there must be a minimization of something, and that of course would be a human life, because you maximize the output, you're putting a lot of stress on the person and so forth. I would just characterize it as if we say, to the extent that Lean is a derivative interpretation of Toyota's management system and the Toyota way, we could say that what you strive for is continuous improvement and respect for people, where people are your business stakeholders, not just your employees. And these were fundamental misunderstandings. The Lean community didn't start to wake up to the respect for people principle until 2007. Even though it was well articulated in the old writings, and even if you go back into scientific management days, there was something called, Frank Woolard called it, what was it, betterment, continuous improvement, and benefit for all, and Frederick Taylor called it betterment and cooperation. So in progressive management, there's always some, human aspect balancing the technical aspect. And so what you're striving to do with TPS is continually improve processes, which and respecting people in those efforts, whether it's the employees, the customers, the investors, suppliers, or the community. You're not making the normal trade-offs that you would make in classical management, which was, do something good for the company, but it's bad for the suppliers or bad for the employees. That's okay in classical management, to be coarse about it, to, screw your customers, cheapen the product, make them wait longer for it. Employees, keep their pay flat, even though inflation is up, and suppliers squeeze them on price. That's all okay in classical management. That's not okay in progressive management. We work collaboratively together. Instead of fighting over the sizes of each slice of the pie, you enlarge the pie in progressive management. This is something Frederick Taylor was trying to do back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So many people hate Taylor. What he was trying to do was create a system of management where everybody got a better deal. And we stopped this zero-sum trade-off kind of thing between particularly management and labor.
And does that include the buyers of the product? Does this human aspect include them, or are they somehow over there somewhere?
No. When progressive management includes the buyers of the product, and one of the things you want to do is have high quality for the purpose of not inconveniencing your customer. On a sort of minimum level, you don't want to inconvenience your customer, such as your car breaking down on the highway in a very dangerous situation on the highway. Or on another level, having the car in your garage and catching fire, and burning down your house and maybe killing people who are in the house. So, this is why in Toyota's management system, you inspect each part one by one. And people say, that's unreasonable, but what they don't realize is the inspections are basically 1 second, one breath, whatever the characteristic dimensions are that need inspecting. Whereas in classical management, you just make a bunch of parts and sample a few and then say the whole batch is good. And that's where you have high warranty costs and recalls and stuff like that.
That's interesting. So that's very good. So I think what you're saying is that the particular way that quality is actually implemented in a Toyota production system setting or in a lean management setting is it's kind of distributed, and each worker is accountable, or each employee is accountable for, within their own realm of responsibility, assessing whether the quality is actually sufficient or not, as opposed to sticking a quality checking function onto the end and doing a calculation about what represents an acceptable defect rate.
Yeah, so in Toyota's system, you have, you don't just have Toyota customer relationships. You have internal supplier customer relationships. So if I do something to this object in a process and you are the next person in line, it's up to me to ensure that I'm not giving you a defective product. That would inconvenience you, that would cause you problems, that would result in rework, backflows upstream of the work. It would result in waste. The part is no good, it's gotta scrap it and so forth. So the idea is you respect your fellow worker by giving them good quality parts and so forth. And that supplier, you must respect your supplier. They must respect you with their inputs and so forth and so on.
That concept is directly applicable to software development or knowledge work, because we'll talk about it in a minute. But if you think about what we're really doing when we're developing software, we're sort of developing complex thinking and documenting it in component parts. And if you're producing a document that's confusing or incomplete or not fit for purpose, it doesn't do what it was meant to do, and then you pass that on. What you're really doing is inconveniencing the recipients and actually adding and injecting noise into the system. One could argue.
Yes, absolutely. And you're also just consuming resources that you don't have. Time, somebody's patience and goodwill, and you're messing up teamwork and so on, or you're compromising teamwork. You're giving people a reason to not like each other.
So I can see maybe some people who might watch this video at this point would be sitting in their chairs thinking, but perfect is the enemy of good. The agile way is to do what you can and then just send it on the basis that, that's going to accelerate, because at least it's better to have something than nothing, rather than sitting on it to sort of make it perfect. We'll just send it out as it is with all of the defects in it, and other people can clean it up later, and we'll go into an iteration cycle. How would you sort of respond to that perspective?
Well, you can do that. I mean, that's a method for developing software, but it's not a very, I would characterize that as an archaic method. What people should be doing is they should be thinking about how do we check the work quickly. And that's what, one of the things that people just fundamentally don't understand about Toyota production system, and hence Lean, is this phrase built-in quality. And it just, when you see it in action, it's an amazing thing. But I mean, somebody makes a part and they do what are called quick checks, or 1 second or 1 breath type of checks. And that's how you can check every part in the process. But most people think checking the part is with, calipers and a dial gauge and measuring. And so it's going to take, 2 or 3 minutes to check each part. And that's not what's happening here. You have go, no go gauges and plug gauges, things like that. And it's just 1 second, boom, you're done, move part to the next step. And that's how you build in quality. You do these checks at every stage along the way. And of course, we all know Toyota's not perfect and their quality is whatever it is, and so on for the Lexus and the rest of the automakers, et cetera. But it's a complex thing because there's so many parts and so on, and a lot of supplier inputs. But the software people should be thinking about this concept of built-in quality and how do we do quick checks.
But they do have a, there is some controversy, to be fair, within the software area about the role of test-driven development. Some people think it's very harmful to your architecture to do that, but I think the consensus is that this is a good thing. So you build in testing from the very beginning. But what I would say is that the testing that they do is very technical and is very much defined on the structure of the software and making sure the software is doing what the software needs to do. That is very different to testing whether the product is actually doing what the user needs it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I get that.
You can have a complete set of green lights on your unit tests and have built a feature that is completely the wrong feature and is not necessary and is not working anyway, but it's all green. So that's another dimension to this. And how does Lean deal with that?
In a software world, I don't know, but I mean, in a product world, what are we doing in a product world? We're designing a product, correct? There's some sketch, there's the design that gets refined, that ends up in the form of blueprints. And then the blueprints result in the fabrication of parts, and the parts are assembled to produce the product that reflects the original sketch, more or less, right? So you go from sketch to detail to production to assembly to product. And I don't know if there's any analog situation like that in software development, but in terms of a manufactured product, that's how it goes.
Right. I mean, because of the sort of differences between hardware and software. Well, it's actually analogous because in software, the blueprint only applies at the level of a very small chunk of functionality. The more you try and define, the more complicated the construct is that you're trying to define using blueprints, the more you find that doesn't work, because no matter how much you think it through, you're always going to miss lots of important things, and when you come to assemble it at the end, it doesn't work.
That's true, but that's because, so I left out a step. You go from sketch to sort of a detailed design, then to blueprint, but then there's a manufacturing process that has to be developed to make whatever that thing is. So that's where you have a manufacturing engineer figuring out, okay, we have this thing to make, how do we go make it? And of course, there's myriad ways to make it. So they got to figure out a way to make it that's least amount of waste, unevenness, and unreasonableness, and a way to do it in a flow. So you have a continuous flow of this stuff. But the manufacturing engineer and the engineer who did the detailed design, who created the blueprints, they need to work together. Because too often what happens is the blueprint gets thrown over to Walter Manufacturing. The manufacturing says, can't make this. Well, we can make it, but it'll be really expensive because, you know, we weren't collaborating on this thing to begin with. So the manufacturing engineer and the design engineer have to collaborate in this process to make sure something is producible, you know, at the target cost. And then, of course, it has to stack up into the assembly and to produce the final product that related to the original sketch.
One thing that I've sort of noticed in software, and we're getting into the software bit of it now, and I'd like your perspective on whether this is true in automobile manufacture, or not necessarily automobile manufacture, but any you know, cans of soup, or you know, drugs that are sort of on a blister pack or something, any sort of physical volume manufacturing situation. But in software, you know, I'm simplifying it, but for the most part, we do have a emerging de facto production system, or build system, if you will, and it consists of Scrum, and it consists of continuous integration and delivery, which is how you basically organize the work of lots of developers who are working on the same body of code at the same time. You need a system for managing changes and getting it into production. So that's the CI/CD bit. But on the front end, you've got the Scrum, which is the sort of, you know, a regular cadence of doing things. And the question is, that is the de facto method for any type of software. If you're doing a startup, not 2 people, but, you know, 10, 15 people, you'll pretty quickly end up going into Scrum, and soon after that, you'll end up with some sort of CI/CD system. If you're doing military software for some sort of guidance system for a helicopter, that's what you'll pretty much be doing. If you're at Google or something developing some changes to Gmail, you'll be pretty much doing that sort of thing. My question is there a common denominator like that in physical goods manufacturing? Is there one general theory that applies everywhere, or is it very much case and situation dependent?
That's a good question. You know, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, there's similarities to the extent that, you know, in manufacturing, there's a lot of code writing to tell a machine what to go do, right? Similar to what you're doing in software development, you're telling a machine what to do.
I guess the question is, yeah, so let's imagine that we had a hypothetical manufacturing situation where we needed to produce, let's put to one side supply and demand. This is just purely an intellectual exercise. So we've got to produce, let's say it's, I don't know, a power drill. That's the product, a power drill, Black & Decker type thing, or Bosch or something like that. And we're going to produce, you know, 250,000 a year. And we have a certain level of quality, and we'll define that, some sort of using some metrics. Now, if you got 5 different teams independently and assembled 5 different teams of experts in the field of manufacturing and designing goods in that category, so electrical power tools, and you basically ask them to design a factory layout to do this job, would you actually look, and you looked at the designs, they'd probably spend weeks, months, maybe figuring out how to do it, you know, where the factory's located, how you're going to set up the line, how many people are going to be needed, how much is going to be automated, how, you know, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made to figure that out. I guess the question is manufacturing so mature now that they'll all pretty much come to the same answer, or would they be all over the place?
They're all over the place. But then Toyota, Mr. Chihiro Nakao developed what's called 3P, production preparation process, which is a process to, you know, integrate all of what you just said about producing the power drill. You know, the layout, the interaction upstream with engineers and downstream with assembly and so forth. So, you know, there's methodologies for dealing with that in manufacturing. And I don't know if a 3P process is ever applied to software. It'd be interesting to know that.
Well, as I said, I think in software, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire software community, but I think it's pretty true that you're going to have Scrum and CI/CD. That's
what is CI/CD?
Continuous integration, continuous.
Okay.
Essentially, well, a code base is like a pile of documents, if you can imagine that. If you got,
let me give you an example here, just on for assembly. If I took this pen apart into its component pieces, let's say there's 10 pieces, and if I gave a little kit of 10 pieces to a bunch of teams, let's say there's 5 teams, each gets a kit with 10 pieces to make a pen, and you give the team an assignment, and you say, I want you to figure out a method for assembling this pen. Each team would come up with 5 different methods. And let's say each team had 5 people on a team. And 4 out of those 5 teams would figure out a way to use all 5 people. And 1 of those teams would figure out a way to assemble the pen with only 2 or 3 people. And then they'd have the problem to figure out what do we do with the other 2 people. The point of it is there's a wide, when we talk about industrial engineering as being methods engineering, that's a kind of a synonymous phrase, not exactly, but IE is often referred to as methods engineering. It's to figure out a method for doing something. And the method can vary tremendously based upon the resources that an organization has. It could be machinery as well as software resources and so on. So what people still tend to look at is what's the one best way to go do something,
right?
Which is where Taylor started out a long time ago. But what people don't realize is by 1915, some of Taylor's people were moving away from that more to engaging the operator and thinking of continuous improvement rather than the one best way. Although Taylor stuck with that throughout his life, and it was a marketing slogan for Frank Gilbreth and Lillian Gilbreth. But anyway, people kind of remained stuck on that.
Here's another insight. Sorry, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No, go on.
So the insight is the following. This is very nice. Let's go back to the example where we were talking about the different ways to set up or design, if that's the right word, the manufacturing operation to produce 250,000 power drills, our power drill per year. We've got 5 different solutions, team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've all got different systems. Mm-hmm. Now, let's imagine that team 3 has got clearly the best solution. How they got the best solution, we don't need to worry about it, but they've got something that works way better. It's producing high quality, high volume for lower cost, and the employees doing it are actually more. Let's imagine hypothetically that's the case. So the question is this: if we put continuous improvement in there, could teams 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 continuously improve their way independently without knowing about team 3 to team 3's operating point? Or is it a situation where if you're too far away from the ideal operating point, you're never going to continuously improve your way there? You're stuck on a local maximum.
No, if you give people some kind of boundary conditions like continuous improvement, to keep thinking of ways to improve the part or the process, so that you eliminate queue time, setup time. If you have some of these boundary conditions and parameters like that, then people will work their way towards that. Or you can go in from the beginning and say to the team, who's presumably been trained in this before, but to understand that you want to find a way to produce this part with the minimum of equipment. If you need equipment that is right sized to the process, meaning making this, it's this big, I don't need a gigantic $5 million machine. Can I cobble something together to do the operation of whatever the machine operation happens to be, based upon junk laying around in the factory, or can I buy some low price components from a industrial supply place, I forgot the name of the industrial supply houses, but anyway, whatever they're called. You know, one of the things, you know, one of the major accomplishments of Toyota was through the Kaizen process was bringing creativity into and utilizing people's ideas for improvement. So typically what happens in an organization, let's say you're designing some software, people will go in a meeting room, say, what's the best way to do this? They'll come up with a flip chart with 10 ways of doing it, and then they'll continue to meet in the meeting room for a few days to come up with the one best way of doing it. Whereas Toyota would say, okay, we've come up with a flip chart of 10 ways, let's try them all out. Try out all 10 ways. Even though the eighth and third way look ludicrous, like there's no way they'll work, and people can inductively predict with, you know, huge accuracy, 99.9% accuracy, 99999, that it won't work. Try it anyway. Try it anyway and see. Because what you learn may apply to your problem at hand, or you may learn something that applies to a future problem. So try them all out. So it's basically taps into people's creativity, unlike the traditional, conventional, classical way of dealing with the problem, which is to, you know, brainstorm and then down select one. So in Toyota's way of doing it, it's trystorming, not brainstorming.
Trystorming?
Try it out.
I was actually trystorming. Got it.
Yeah, no brainstorming. Don't do that. Trystorming. Come up with an idea, try it out. When? Immediately, now. Don't schedule it for next week, next month. Forget about all that stuff, because if you do that stuff, you're just doing what everybody else does, which is slow rolling improvement. Okay, I got an idea, but we need this person, that person, and they're scheduled, they're on vacation, this, that, the other, so we can't do it for 2 months. As opposed to, who cares if they're out, let's try it now.
This is very nice. Yeah, okay.
So it's a completely different mentality. And this gets lost in Lean. The time function of do it now and the creativity aspect. And Lean for a decade or more has really just not been interested in Kaizen. And when I say Lean, I mean the people who promote Lean, the organizations that promote Lean, big names that you hear of, the top 10 Lean promoters, they don't talk about Kaizen. And I don't know why. Ask them, have a Zoom with them. But and I'm not going to speculate. But this is the fundamental thing. Kaizen is reading, writing, and arithmetic of any process improvement, whether it's software, cooking at home, fixing your car, you know, whatever it is. Although I don't like to bring Kaizen into the home, but whatever it work for any process, finance process, HR process, IT process, you should be applying Kaizen. Now, problem is, what you bump into is most people work in a classically managed organization where the leaders want to see a Gantt chart, who's doing what, when, what's the budget, how much, et cetera, and all that stuff kills creativity, the spirit of Kaizen, the quick changing, improving things quickly, doing it now. That's just not built for classically managed organizations. That's how Toyota went from no. I mean, people got to realize, you know, after World War II, basically 30 years later, Toyota's on the world stage as an automaker by the mid-70s. How do you go from nothing to being on the stage with GM, Ford, et cetera, and you know, whoever else, European automakers and so on? How do you do that in 30 years? And it really isn't even 30 years, because the first 5 years were nothing. Between 1945 and 50, you may as well subtract.
Right.
And maybe even to 1950, 50. And their quality was terrible, by the way, until the 60s. So, you know, early 60s, you know, like 1961, 62, 63. So really, in a 10-year period, you go from crap to, you know, on the world stage with good quality, efficient, fuel-efficient cars. What did they do? Kaizen. And this is something people don't want to know about, learn about, understand in the Lean world. So
on the Kaizen topic, which is the sort of the essence of the idea of continuously improving, always seeking ways to improve at a working level, at a hands-on shop floor, you know, practical in a practical way. Do you think that the sort of unique situation that Toyota was in at the end of the war, 46, to 50, that sort of time frame, where the employees had a job for life, but in return for that, I mean, I think 20% of them were laid off, but the remaining ones were given a job for life. But the deal was that they had to actually, they were part of a family. It was a community. They were shared ownership. They were giving something back to the company because the company had given something to them, which is very valuable. So they were kind of motivated to see the company succeed and to see it to see it become successful. Now, I'm just wondering if you take an example of someone walking down the street on their own, so no one else around, they're walking past a trash bin, waste paper bin in a public street, and they see a Coca-Cola can on the floor. Someone's just chucked it out the car window and it's just on the floor. Now, I'm just wondering, most people will just walk past that and
right.
maybe not even notice it. Some people will actually see the Coke can and see the bin, and no one's watching. They will decide, I'm going to put it in the bin. It takes a second, it's done. Now, is that sort of mentality the sort of mentality that you need to actually operationalize Kaizen? And is that the X factor that Toyota had at the end of the war, or not? What do you think?
I don't know. When you're hired into a company, you're hired to do a job, and there's a job description, more or less. To operate this machine or do this thing in HR or whatever, wherever. And if you set the expectation that you're hired to do this job, do your job, people will do that. If you set the expectation you're hired to do this job and improve your job,
I see,
and improve it in a way that doesn't mess anything up upstream or downstream, and in fact engage people upstream and downstream of your work in improving your process so they understand what you're doing, and you can communicate with them that it won't mess up what they're doing upstream or downstream, and then you work with them up downstream or upstream or both to help them improve their process, and you participate in that so that you can contribute your ideas, and also inform them that that's not going to mess me up. In fact, that'll make my job easier. And so it's one of the expectation setting. And so just if you let it be sort of a natural thing, you're not going to get much result. Now, of course, people all the time in organizations have an idea. They say, hey, boss, I got an idea to do this, that, or the other that's better. And the boss usually shuts them down. Because boss doesn't, anybody, supervisor, mid-level manager, et cetera, is afraid of experimentation because it might blow up and it might look bad that they allowed such a thing to happen.
It's a very nice idea. So what you seem to be saying is that, if it's framed in the right way and it's embedded as part of the company culture, then there's no reason why it can't be successful.
Yeah.
In any
company. I mean, you see all this, everybody gets up in a lather about A3 reports and value stream maps and Gemba walks and so forth. But time after time, the top Toyota executives talk about how important Kaizen is to the functioning of Toyota, and you can smell it in the air, Kaizen. Now, A3 reports, value stream maps, and all that are derivatives out of Kaizen, but what they fundamentally mean is how do we improve the work to make it easier and so that it flows better with less interruption? Because what they discovered is the lowest cost for, they think in terms of total cost, not just unit cost. They don't neglect unit cost, but they're thinking what's the lowest total cost way to produce, in Toyota's case, a vehicle. And that is basically by producing one part at a time, one piece flow, and connecting processes so you have not just a flow in producing your, crankshaft, but a flow in the, production overall, that things are connected in timing and sequence to be able to do the assembly. And that's what was amazing about Toyota. You asked earlier, what's amazing about Toyota? There was three things. They created this management system. Over time, it evolved. They did something Henry Ford didn't do. Henry Ford had a flow in the final assembly, but everything upstream was all batch and queue processing. So Toyota created a flow upstream, and in the 1970s started to include suppliers. And then the third thing is that for the most part, they've been able to keep this going through generations of managers, generations of leaders. Because usually when leadership changes, somebody says, you know, I don't do it that way, let's do it my way, and so forth. And they've been able to survive that with a few hiccups along the way. They've been able to stay the course. Those
This
are
is
three amazing things.
it's very interesting. I think that the this concept of Kaizen is, I'm just thinking about how it applies to software. This is very good. We have in software, in Scrum, this thing called a daily stand-up, which is meant to be a coming together of the team and a review of where we are and a review of where we're going and whether there's still alignment, and if there isn't, we need to make some adjustments. It's a kind of micro replanning. The Scrum people sometimes say, oh, well, it's just a case of you have to ask the three questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? This is not really the idea of it. The idea of it is a sort of a micro resync. Okay, that's one touch point where you can implement Kaizen, I guess. And the other one is a retrospective, which is where everyone comes together and has a bit of a drains up every once in a while on what's happening. But what's interesting about that is that we're not really talking about significantly changing any of the processes. That's kind of out of, because Scrum, you can't change that. You can improve it to a certain extent, but you're constrained within this box because of a priori decision that you are required to use this system. Do you have anything like that in manufacturing?
Kaizen, Mike, what you experience in Kaizen teaches you something fundamental to think about all the time, is how can I improve the work? How can I improve what I'm doing? And that's always part of my thinking in whatever I do. How can I improve what I'm doing? The various jobs that I had over the years, different types of work in companies, I've always been thinking about how I can improve what I'm doing. And also when there's a break point, you go from one job to another, I think a lot about, what should I stop doing completely, and rethink how I should do something. So I'm always thinking about how I can do something differently or better. So, when it comes to writing all these books, years ago I did it one way, and if, some time goes by, and there's some micro changes in all of this, and then there's, a break point. It says, now we got to trash this way of doing it and start over and do it a different way and do it, and so on. So, just always thinking about how my teaching, it's always like, courses were never the same. I'll tell you, I retired from teaching last May, and last December, I was assigned the same courses to teach in the spring semester that I had taught in the fall. And I could have just said, I'm going to reuse the same courses, I don't care. But I overhauled one course completely, and I significantly changed another course, and less so for a third course. And I could have just sat there and said, I'm retiring in 6 months, I don't care. I'm just going to, offer the same course that I offered the prior semester, which had undergone changes, by the way, and during the semester and over the prior summer. But I was thinking about, your customer, your student, whoever's the beneficiary or the recipient of your work, and how can I improve that work? And also, am I satisfied with what I'm producing? That's another aspect of it. Is it really delivering the desired outcome? What is the desired outcome? Do I even understand it? That took some time, when you're teaching, what is the desired outcome? But is what I'm doing delivering the desired outcome? And when I pioneered Kaizen in higher education for delivering, course content, basically, not delivery, but for doing courses, you wouldn't believe, professors work by themselves as solitary contributors. And, let's say there's 10 courses in an academic program, and let's say it's taught by 5 professors. Each professor does 2 courses, but they do their courses independently and they don't know how it connects to any other courses. And when you get these professors in Kaizen and to look at the courses in detail, you find out that what comes at the end should have been at the beginning. What's in the middle shouldn't be talked about because it's talked about before or after, whatever. There's all of these disconnects. And that stuff is pervasive everywhere in every organization.
You said that, alluded at the beginning or towards the beginning, that Lean has had difficulty finding adoption especially in larger organizations. I mean, where would you summarize Lean today insofar as its usage and adoption in outside of Japan, in Europe, in the US, Canada, Australia?
It's hard. The thing that everybody was after 30 years ago was lean transformation, to transform the organization from classical management, batch and queue, seller's market, and it wasn't all comprehended that way back then. But anyway, that's what the desire was, to progressive management, buyer's market, flow, continuous flow rather than batch and queue. And a lot of people have just given up on that dream because most organizations, don't want that kind of transformation. So a lot of that language has fallen by the wayside. Lean transformation now is just we're doing lean, which means we're using some of the various lean tools and methods in our problem solving. And mostly it's not Kaizen, because Kaizen fundamentally says change. And applying various lean tools and methods means just fix a problem that you have, but otherwise keep doing things the same way. So it's drastically different. So lean is everywhere, but nowhere, really, in my opinion, because people just aren't fundamentally interested, especially leaders, the bosses, are not interested in just the ideas that people have to fundamentally change how they go about doing the work.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, a lot of it relates to status. I've written 6 books on this. Basically, leaders are more interested in just preserving the status quo than they are in, any kind of significant change.
Right.
A lot of it relates to status. But one of the things Kaizen teaches is people at the bottom have the ideas for improvement and the people at the top don't. So it messes up the mentality of people at the top who believe that they have all the answers to the problems and they know what's going on and so forth, when in fact the people at the top don't know what's going on. They have an abstract understanding of what's happening in the organization. I had one vice president tell me, if you're in this business, quality is a given. They say asinine things like that, but have no bearing in truth. Quality is not a given. Quality is something that is, you need to understand is something jagged. It improves, it gets worse, it improves. There's a lot of things going on that contribute to whether quality is any good. And even if an organization that has a high amount of individualized surveillance on quality, like Toyota, look at their quality ratings. So it's not a given. It's just nonsense. But executives like to say stuff like that.
How important is in Lean? How important would you say direct feedback from customers is? I remember seeing a chart. I think it was a chart that Deming produced, which showed it was quite an old chart, just a kind of a process, some sort of process manufacturing. Yeah. And there was customers over on the right-hand side, but very importantly, there was a link, a line that went from the customer right back into the center of the manufacturing process. And I'm wondering what role that plays in Lean, as far as you can perceive it.
Well, I think it's company specific, but I mean it's very important. But of course, the difficulty is there's signal and then there's a lot of noise. You know, I mean, like, so somebody reviews my book on Amazon, and their comment is, I received the book dirty, or the pages are falling out. So I get a 2-star review for that. Is that my problem as an author? And I don't print the books, I don't ship them. Is that a problem for the printer and for the shipper? Yeah. Are they paying attention? Probably not. So you know, then I do get reviews that are signal, and sometimes signal is, you know, something specific and actionable, and other times signal is not. So it depends.
But if you have if you have a good filter, and you've got rid of all of the noise and removed the outliers and all of that, you'd have boiled it down to valuable feedback from people who have a need for the product, you know, who are experienced using the product and have provided good or bad feedback. How prevalent do you think that connection is back into the machine, as it were?
Probably it depends. I mean, in a classically managed organization, that feedback is very poor. You know, Xerox is the great example of that. Where in the late 1990s, they were losing market share to Ricoh and, I don't know, whoever else makes copiers and so forth. And all that bad news didn't get to the executives. You know, it got filtered out. They didn't want to hear it. And then Xerox almost goes bankrupt because the leaders didn't understand the lousy market position they're in. Or the problem at General Motors, where executives would go to a test track like in Arizona to drive the vehicles. And what they didn't realize is that the people who at the test track, they're taking the automobile from Detroit and fixing it prior to the executive driving it. So when the executive drives it, they think their cars are world class. That's because they got fixed prior to, you know, all the manufacturing defects from Detroit got fixed when the car landed in Arizona. So yeah, I mean, the leaders don't want to hear the bad news.
Right.
And so this gets filtered out.
Do you think that there's I mean, going back to the human part of it, and the Kaizen part of it, and the distributed quality, do you think in a company like that, like Xerox, like the example in Xerox, do you think the people on the shop floor, in the machine, in the operations part of the company, the product development people, the marketing people, the sales people, the channel partners, do you think they all knew that there was a problem?
Oh yeah. But what's the payoff for raising your hand and saying there's a problem? You know, it's career limiting. You get late, you know, you end up tops on the layoff list when the time for layoffs comes around and so forth.
But do you think that you could have Kaizened your way out of that problem, or Xerox could have done?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. But you have to be attentive to feedback more or less in real time. You can't be, you know.
So if you sit on a conference call with a customer, as an example, and that they spend half an hour pouring their heart out to you about all of the things that you should have done, that you promised to do, that you didn't deliver, and you still haven't done it, and where is this and where is the other, and you're listening very quietly and very patiently and making notes, and it's all very sort of uncomfortable, and then you have a sort of very nice sort of end the call, and then it all goes back to just the way it was before until we have the next quarterly call with the customer. That's that's an example of what you're talking about, where you've got the feedback. I mean, how much clearer could it be? But they still don't take any action. They're kind of
right. So a company,
why is that?
They're just not attentive to the feedback. They don't look at the feedback as you know, as interesting. What's lacking is curiosity. Why are we getting this feedback? What's causing us to get this feedback? You know, what can we do to avoid this feedback, this negative feedback, other than ignore it? What needs to be improved in order to do that? You know, I worked for a company that was, customers would say, you're great at firefighting, but what you're lousy at doing is avoiding the firefight to begin with, which is why we're buying our product from somebody else. And so, and that didn't change how the organization was led. It was still led in a, firefighting kind of mode was a good way to do the business.
I've got a okay, this is good. So we'll move on to looking at time. We've kind of been on for a little bit over an hour. Just to sort of start to move to a close. I've got another question, Bob, for you. And it's really comparing software development, which is a sort of, I guess, art and craft of developing and documenting complex thinking.
Mm-hmm.
One could say ultimately the thinking is documented in the form of a programming language, documentation. With the sort of art and craft of the design and development of physical material goods. Now it occurs to me, and one of the advantages with software and one of the disadvantages of it, you could argue, is that you can change it very easily and very quickly and have dramatic impacts quite quickly. The actual costs are not there. You don't have the same issues with production tooling, which can take 12 weeks to lay down and get. You don't have any of that to worry about. But it still seems that software development organizations are incredibly difficult to change. There's a kind of intellectual inertia about them. Is this real, or is this sort of in our heads? Do we create these barriers for ourselves? We're saying that we can change it very quickly, but when we talk about the actual construct that we use to develop software, it seems incredibly rigid and fixed and very hard to change. I mean,
Yeah.
You can go into a manufacturing situation and very easily change the shop floor around. You can swap machines out, put new ones in, change the layout. Maybe you have to sort of take a week off or something. But it seems to be a lot easier to change it, even though it's kind of harder to change it. Have you thought about that question?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the this book I wrote recently, A Changed Perspective, really focuses on the preconceptions that people have and the preconceptions that prevent changes in thinking in the way we do things. And this is informed at a very early age, where we tend to think of we're influenced by managers once we get a job, but as infants we have a manager and they're called our parents, and they tell us what to do and what not to do, and they yell at us when we mess up. And we learn this at the age of 2 or 3, and then we join some sports at the age of 5, and we have a coach and they're a manager and they tell us what to do and what not to do. And so at a very early age we have preconceptions about what to do and what not to do. And then when we go through, we learn coding ourselves from watching YouTube videos or whatever, or university, listening to the professor and doing coding and so forth, and a whole bunch more preconceptions are piled in. And then we enter an organization that's been established for 5 or 10 years that has a way of doing things. Nobody's hired with you. When you're hired, nobody says, okay, I want you to destroy how we do things and think of it completely new. So people are just happy to go along with whatever current way of doing things. They don't have the dissatisfaction. I mean, I was immensely dissatisfied in higher education because of just the academic and administrative processes and the length of time it would take to do anything and so forth. And I mean, we had a budgeting process that was 9 months long. It's like, Christ, you can build a 737 in 1 quarter of that time, but you're producing a budget, 50 pages, takes 9 months. I mean, it's a joke. And the head of that process was an industrial engineer.
Right, really.
And the difference is, of course, that industrial engineer didn't learn Toyota style industrial engineering, because if they did, they wouldn't do such a stupid thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that the operational efficiency of Toyota at the moment is kind of reaching what the laws of physics say it can?
I have no idea. And it really isn't a matter of operational efficiency. It's a matter of, are we wasting people's lives doing stupid stuff? We're gonna have to give that consideration. You go to work, you get paid whatever you get paid. I mean, I used to ask my students, how much of your time is actually, value added in terms of, you get paid for 8 hours a day. How much of that time are you actually doing something value adding? And of course, the answer ranged all over the place, but the average was like 50%. I get paid 8 hours, but 4 hours are actually doing something that matters. And if you're an employee, you go, well, that's great. I'm getting paid for 8 hours for doing only 4 hours of work. But if you own the business, you got to be asking yourself the question, why am I paying somebody 8 hours to do 4 hours of work? Now, theoretically, you're not going to pay, you have bathroom breaks, you have lunch, whatever. But most people feel like they want to contribute more to the business, and whatever their function happens to be, would like to be doing things that are, more valuable to the overall process and whatever it is the customer receives. In some areas, it's difficult to do that, such as in the finance organization. There's a lot of jobs that, don't connect well to whatever the end product or service is.
There's an interesting perspective on value, though, isn't it? Because we've been talking about value insofar as, the customers are concerned, the buyers of the product, how they perceive the value. Does the door sound nice when it closes? That sort of thing. But you're talking about value as far as the employees are concerned, meaning when I go home at the end of the day, do I feel as though I've actually
made a good contribution?
Have I actually delivered anything of value, some tangible deliverable, some tangible contribution that I can see is going to help? So, because if you think about it from the point of view of, I guess, a collection of individuals working in a company, this is an interesting thought experiment. If the customers are driving value, then that must mean the employees are putting value in, which means they must feel and identify with the fact that they are. And
right,
if
you're going to 4 hours of my time is wasted, is waste.
But even 4 hours that you're working on work, is it the right sort of work?
Yeah, that's right. Is it the right sort of work? Right. But the notion of value really comes in through the lean construct, because in TPS the focus is more on eliminating waste. It's not ignoring what customer perceives as value, but the focus tends to be more on eliminating waste. Because upstream, marketing or somebody has figured out, what the customer values, and that then gets transmitted through sketches of products and so forth, and design of services that gets put into some more specific form, such as blueprints or a plan, but etc.
So, but that's quite a significant difference, isn't it? I mean, if you're thinking optimizing for value delivery versus waste minimization, the latter one, the waste minimization, means within these particular operating parameters, meaning number of vehicles that need to be produced per month, to a certain level of quality,
demand,
which we talk about, and exactly based on some sort of demand pull cut through the system. So I get an order from a dealer, I've got to turn around that order within 4 or 5 days or something. Whatever metrics we're going to put on it, within that sort of operating envelope, your job is to actively work to minimize waste.
Well, I would say to eliminate waste, because there's lots of waste that's there that you can't see. So we don't use the term minimize. It is to eliminate waste. And, so you had some ideas, you eliminated waste. Now your job is to see where waste is that you haven't been able to see before and eliminate that. It's different.
Okay, that's
the way of the way of thinking is completely different. It's not maximizing, minimizing is not the useful terms in this.
But there are some things some types of waste that you can't eliminate. So, for example, that the spot welding machine that actually welds the car together, it has a certain lifetime. I'm just making this up now, but I imagine the things that actually do that need to be
that's the electrodes.
The electrodes.
They need to be replaced.
Right. So you're going to have to sort of take the machine out of operation. Someone's going to have to come in. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else. They have to take the machine and replace the electrodes, and then you can start all over again. Maybe you have to do a test weld before they can. So that's an example of waste that you're not going to ever go to. It's not going to go to zero.
Right. But I guess in software development, my question would be things like, always asking, how can I improve the work? and so, for example, in writing books, I used to, be up late at night writing books. Then now I write books better first thing in the morning, et cetera. So, when do software developments, when are they most productive in terms of producing a high quality product? Is it from, 9 at night till 3 in the morning? Is it, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m.?
What I sort of really dislike is being interrupted. I mean, intensely dislike when I'm in that flow state and someone interrupts me. Oh, so I think really that is probably really bad for software. If you are continually in meetings, continually getting interruptions, and having your time salami sliced, that is tremendously destructive to value creation.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the question is, in software development, I mean, I have no idea what software development. I'm a writer, but I don't write software. And I know how I write.
But that's a kind of software.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree. It is. But I'm not particularly bothered by interruptions, by the way. But some people are. I mean, it really has very little effect on me. But the point of it is, yeah. I mean, I would love to know more about this. And I read about what Scrum and Agile is, and so still kind of doesn't make any sense to me. I need to see it in action. I would really like to. But the bottom line is are people thinking about how the work can be improved? And if the work can be improved by putting people not in cubicles to write software, but in however they want to be. Some people might like to be in cubicles. Other people might like to be in offices. Other people might like to be at home. I don't know. But you have to think about how that work can be improved and eliminate the queue time between steps in the process and connect up the process so that it flows and so forth. And I suspect that if you're a kind of company that develops software where everybody's got to be at work and everybody's got to fill out a time card and everybody's got to deal with distractions and so on, that is probably not very effective.
Yeah. I think we don't have the sort of everyone's got to be in the office at the moment, although, as I'm sure we read in the news, some companies are trying to achieve just that. But I think most people are thinking it's more of a hybrid situation where there's some in the office and some and some people work better on their own and other people hate working on their own. So
well, I'll tell you, when I used to do technical engineering reports and so forth, I never did them at work. I did them at home. Because to me, work was where you engage with people for various problems. But writing should be outside of that realm. It's just, I never did it. I mean, I did homework. On my time, would do these reports, nights and weekends. Didn't do them at work.
Yeah.
Never did it.
This is very interesting. We could go on for a long time, Bob.
Because you have to be able to think. Work is not, if you're in a classically managed business, it's do the job. It isn't think and do. It is do. And I had to leave work to be able to think and do.
My mind is spinning with. There are so many sort of parallels with the software. I can just see how much, frankly, how much of a problem we have in software. I mean, going back to the example, I'm kind of simplifying it to a degree, but I thought it was quite an interesting analogy, the Power Tool example, where we had the 5 teams.
Mm-hmm.
If you did the same thing in software and you had 5 teams and they were all given the job of, I don't know, building some, let's imagine some random example, some task management app or meditation app or something not too complicated, but not too simple. And you set them all off and you gave them the same requirements. The business has got to be sort of this sort of size in the next 5 years. This is how much revenue, this profitability. This is how much capital you've got to get to a prototype or something. I'm quite sure that and you can set it up however you want, you would get quite a lot of commonality, but you would get some teams that would do something radically different.
No, there's well, even within the same company, if you gave 5 teams, write the meditation app, some teams will come up with, I don't know what, 50,000 lines of code, and other people will, do it in 5,000, right?
Yeah, but they'll have a different method for doing it. It won't just be
right.
The actual
Right.
product will be
Yeah,
different.
there'll be a different.
The way they've actually done it and gone about it. I mean, some people would have actually written a long, complicated requirements document, and then they would have sort of set it out, take it, we'll do this bit first, and you can build that first. Then once you finish that, then we'll go and test it. Other people would be straight out on the street trying to find people and ask them for requirements, and who do we know who does meditation? They would be all over the map. All over.
Yeah, sure. And in my world, in the books that I tend to write very focused. One of the reasons why people like my book is because I don't turn 130 pages into 300, 400, 500 pages. But the idea is, in whatever activity it is, Scrum, just to give you an example, in academic meetings that drove me nuts, is that so I worked in a university as a professor, and we have a department, and so there's a department chair. And so when I came into university, we have, an agenda for the department meetings, and the agenda is the agenda. And then we have a new department chair, and the agenda is the same as it was with the other one. And then we have a new department chair, and the agenda is the same as it was with the prior two. Now, were I department chair, of course, that agenda would have been thrown out. We'd have a new agenda and a new way of doing things. And I suspect that the Scrum meetings, for example, are, we do it this way, and the prior Scrum person did it that way, so we're doing it this way, and the next Scrum person comes along, does it the way the prior 2 or 3 Scrum people. Is that accurate, more or less? That kind of stuff would drive me nuts.
Yeah, so
because it's like you need to look for better ways of doing things. A way of doing something has a finite lifetime in terms of its effectiveness.
Okay.
And whether it's because people just get bored with it, or whatever the reason may be, there's a finite time in which something is effective, and that after which time it loses its effectiveness, it becomes perfunctory. People start to get bored. They don't think. They don't contribute ideas.
Let me just throw a pebble in the pond, if I may. So there is a thing called the Scrum Guide, which is around about a 20-page document you can go online. And it's kind of, I don't want to use the word Bible, but it's a sort of an authoritative document authored by
I've read it.
The co-creators, right? There is a word in that document which is highly controversial, but it's been there for a long time. And the sentence that contains the word is along the lines of, Scrum is immutable. Any attempt to partially implement Scrum or remove some of the important components will render Scrum almost useless. That's the kind of message. Now, how do you feel about that?
Well, you're destined for big problems. You're going to suffer.
But that's the go-to agile methodology. That's it.
Yeah, well,
right. I should use the word framework. So to answer your question about what happens in Scrum meetings, I mean, you should know that I'm a bit down on Scrum. I mean, I think it's got some very, very good points, but it's probably well past the sell-by date now for all sorts of complex reasons. But it's a very, very, it's positioned as a lightweight framework. It is no lightweight framework. This is a very sophisticated system for developing software. It includes roles and ceremonies, artifacts. It's got a whole certification system attached to it. You have career paths for people called Scrum Masters and product owners. It's supported by a lot of academic thinking. There's a whole industry around Scrum and promoting Scrum. Consultants come in and do an agile transformation, and what they often mean by that is we'll do Scrum across the company. It's very, very sophisticated, and it just seems very different to what we've been talking about with Lean, which is sort of fundamentally Kaizen based. We need to eliminate waste and do what we need to do to improve all the time, without really necessarily there being any sort of high level construct that we're all operating within.
The fundamental thing that's recognized in Toyota is that things change, things evolve, times change. You have to keep up with the times. And so something like Scrum, it was established and people, applied it, and it got more rigid and so forth over time. But yet times have changed and people's attitude and thinking about software development has changed. Customers of software have changed. Computing has changed. Programming languages have changed. So, maybe Scrum doesn't work anymore. At some point, it probably needs to change in whole or part. But that's the mindset, is that don't be too wedded to something for too long, because things change.
That's very true. I think there are some people, and I'm sort of in my own capacity, sort of advocating. I probably frame it in the way of as evolution and improvement rather than change. That whole change word is a bit scary for some people, but yeah, I think Scrum is very old. I mean, it's 1995, and it's really, it kind of has changed, but structurally, it's basically the same as it was in the days where we used to sell software on a CD, and you'd
yeah.
Can you imagine that? The internet didn't even exist. It's hard to imagine a world without mobile phones and without internet. But that's where Scrum came from, and it's really substantially unchanged since then.
Yeah, to my understanding, various people writing pieces of a software that have to all connect up into producing something is, I've never done that in terms of writing a book. If we're doing it in a book, we have to have an editor and somebody who connects all the pieces across, and that requires a vast amount of knowledge of all the component parts of the chapters that the authors are writing, not only to provide editorial guidance for each individual chapter, but to make sure it's woven together as thematically as the bound volume of a book, plus the exposition by the editor in the beginning saying, here's what everybody's writing about, here's how it connects, here's what's unique and new and different. And I don't know if software is written as, in my analogy, chapters in a book that have to come together in a volume, which would be the program itself, to produce the output. In the automobile business, there's a chief engineer, somebody who's responsible for the vehicle.
So this is very, very nice. And
does that exist in software development? Is there the chief engineer or the editor?
In a nutshell, no. And it's a long slide to explain why. But essentially, the history is that software got into a mess in the late 80s because IBM were trying to use, very, very high-end bureaucratic project management techniques, which they were using mainframe computers, where you've got a lot of complicated hardware components. PCBs have to be ordered, multi-layer PCBs, 8 layers, 10 layers, 12 layers, plastics, tooling. They tried to use those same project management methods for software. Meaning planning it all out in advance. And it was a total disaster, and the industry was in a mess. And so Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber came along with Scrum in 1995, and then the Agile people, including Ken and Jeff, they were part of the Agile founders, if you will, framers, came out with Agile in the manifesto in 2001. And since that day, or those days, the concept of project management, the word project, they're kind of dirty words. Project is actually demonized. So but it's got the pendulum has swung the other extreme. So now, to answer your question, when you go into a software product development situation, you do actually have a project construct. It's just really a term for a container of work. But the machine that is used to build the software works in very small increments, and there isn't really a project container for it. It just comes out at the end, and the project management, the sort of chief engineer part of it, the architecture part of it, is kind of done under the radar, informally and on spreadsheets, and it's not handled very well, and it's a problem.
Okay.
Bit of a long answer to the question, but that's Long and the short
I
of it.
mean, I never liked project management construct, and I never operated under that because, you know, the minute I would, you know, you produce the Gantt chart, you know, you sleep on it, the next day you think where something needs to change. So to me, it was totally useless. Project management stuff. Now it does work very well in construction projects. They have project management down in a very useful way that works out quite well. But for developmental kind of activities, I don't normally see it as being very good. And I've worked on a lot of development stuff, and the projects were disasters because of project management stuff.
Yeah, and that's known in software. You know, it never worked then, and it never will work because it's sort of fundamentally hard to plan anything even moderately complicated in advance.
Right.
I mean, Scrum works on a 2-week planning cycle, so
Yeah.
I mean, the idea is that if you can't plan at least 2 weeks of work, you've got real problems. You know,
So one of the things you said about Scrum is we talk about in the Scrum meetings, what did we do yesterday? What do we need to do today? What do we do tomorrow? Is that right?
There's the 3 questions. It's every day there's a stand-up.
Yeah.
15-minute stand-up, and the team gets together, and they're meant to ask the 3 questions. And they are, what did we do yesterday? What are you doing today? And what are the blockers? That's what many people would articulate. But that's really not the purpose of the stand-up. If you go back to the source of it, it's a bit of a long story we won't go into now, but essentially it's an opportunity for the team to come together and to realign on the objective. You know, is the objective still the objective that we had yesterday? Has anything changed? Has any new, you know, it's a micro opportunity to just check that we're still going in the right direction. That's really the purpose of the stand-up.
Okay. But I would just leave it by saying, you know, look for opportunities to trash how you've been doing things and rethink of how to do it differently. You know, and that comes either iteratively or in, you know, sort of the flash of light, like, oh yeah, I've been doing it all wrong. I need to rethink it completely.
And that's a great point to end on. It sums it up beautifully. So thanks an awful lot for that. Really appreciate your time, Bob.
Oh, you're welcome. Take care.
Thanks then. Bye-bye now.